10 years later, the Gomeros had enough, and they actually killed Peraza, the one who originally had captured the 1,000 that he took to Spain. And this was during a very, very violent uprising. The Catholic kings saw this as an ungrateful action by the indigenous people, and they said, oh, you want war? War you'll get. And in the end, they were again enslaved. So by 1489, there were ships just beaming with slaves from the Canary Islands, and they were brought to Andalusian and Mediterranean slave markets to be sold. Again, Isabel and Ferdinand came to their rescue and declared that they were free Christian vassals and that they could not be enslaved. So this is in 1490, around the same time that they're butting heads with the Muslims down south. By the time that they declared this again, Gomeros that were captives and were enslaved in Spain actually had to go through the courts and gain legal freedom. They had to do this individually, and it was a very complex system because you know what they wanted them to prove? They wanted them to prove that they were native. They wanted them to prove that they were natives, indigenous people. And this is the same thing that happened to indigenous people from the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and all the other areas that they conquered. So in order to keep them enslaved, a lot of them were told that they were Africans. That, no, you're not an indigenous person. You were from Africa, and so were your family members. So this gave rise to how important it was to distinguish themselves and to keep their culture in order to prove that they were natives of the original lands. So by the early 16th century, so the 1500s, the Canary Islanders were no longer enslaved. They weren't transported to Europe. They weren't put into this treatment. However, what did happen to them was something that happened to the indigenous people of the Dominican Republic, which was paper genocide. So by 1496, their 9 kingdoms had all fallen to the Castilian crown. Many of the Guanches who were not killed during these invasions, as already stated, they were sent to slavery in the peninsula. And those who weren't sent were forced to assimilate to the culture and the religion of the conquistadores. So now Spain, and we can say Europe, had an example to go by as to how to proceed in their conquest of future islands. So they went in this order. Slavery was first. Let's conquer and enslave. Genocide, it would follow with the whole disease, radical transformation of the land, and exploitation of its resources. So from this mixture of indigenous and Spanish and Portuguese and French, a new society was created. Those that immigrated later on in the 1800s to the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba, etc., brought with them things like gofio, guisado de carne de chivo, sancocho, bacalao, and posiblemente mangú también. So these mixes, even though it came by through horribly violent ways, gave rise to other things that we now enjoy. It's insane. But I will continue on giving a brief timeline of the actual African slave trade and also of the free Africans that immigrated on their own to our island.